church planners love what they think their people will become when they're part of the church for a long time instead of loving who the people are as they are.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Intentional Churches podcast. And as if you listen for any amount of time, you know we're here to give you some practical wisdom and insight into leading your church, and especially about aligning your team and your people to the Great Commission. We've got a great conversation today I've been looking forward to for a while. I'm excited first, though, to let you guys know as our listeners that the IC team's really been working on this thing for a while, and it's called the Intentional Churches Community. It's a free-to-join online community platform, and it's really designed to foster individual growth of leaders while really nurturing this collaborative, collective wisdom of best practices from the trenches of church ministry, the real side of church ministry. And you can get started today with your free account at intentionalchurches.com/community. Well, I'm happy to introduce a newer friend to me, and some of you may know Jesse DeYoung. Jesse, say hi to our listeners if you would.
Doug, what's up, man? So good to be with you.
It's good, man. So you're in the Denver area. Are you guys? Is it snowing?
Bro, it is like, I think 5 degrees today. We gathered some church planners in. They're from Phoenix, all these different areas, and not prepared for this. We don't like it this cold out here. It's only this cold maybe 1 or 2 weeks a year, but we're in the middle of it.
Oh, man. It's awesome. You got church planners there. I forgot you guys were doing that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We've got overlap with Echo's church. We'll talk about them later.
Gosh, yeah.
But they're rock stars. So, hey, man, for our listeners who may not know you, give us kind of an overview of you, just a little bit about you, your family, and we'll get into Flatirons here in a little bit, but just kind of your ministry journey.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Again, great to be on. And I'm a pastor's kid. My dad, Brett DeYoung, who I think you knew, and just ran in some different kind of executive ministry circles. And I grew up and I saw a dad that the thing that I would tell you about my dad is he was great at his job and he was a great dad. And so often PKs either become preachers or they just go off the rails. And I would attribute my dad just had a deep love for Jesus and the church, and I got to see that. And so it was something I wanted to model. So grew up in a ministry household, met my wife Kara in our youth group in Kentucky. We've got 4 kids now, a couple teenagers, a couple younger. And then we've been out in Colorado for 13 years. And so came out to work at Flatirons and to launch our first secondary campus. And so we launched that. And then we've really just filled a couple different roles. And then I've been in the executive lead pastor seat here for coming up on 4 years.
That's great, man. So yeah, I did know your dad, met with him a few times, and he was the real deal.
He's the
Was
best.
my experience always. And just an honor to get to know you a little bit. So, okay, first off, tell me, what did you call yourself? Executive lead?
We just added an adjective to it. Executive lead pastor. It's funny. People are like, why executive lead pastor? And really it came out of a season of Flatirons brokenness as a culture and just a lot of team unhealth. And so when I moved into this role, Jim, our lead pastor, wanted to differentiate it and essentially to say, hey, I'm lead pastor, but Jesse's executive lead pastor, which means like all other decisions and ministries are going to filter up through Jesse and then get to Jim, rather than like and we've got a couple other executive pastors on the team, multiple, like I think anybody on our team, on the executive team could do my job. But this was just to really identify this is the one who's leading the rest of the exec pastors.
I like it, man. In fact, anybody who listens to me, which I don't know that many people do, but I will talk about for so long we lived with I think appropriate respect for the position of senior pastor or whatever.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I do believe the executive kind of function, whoever's leading out on strategy, accountability, culture development, is really just as pivotal, especially in a growing church, as the lead. Like they're complementary positions. And so anyway, man, I like that you guys are saying that.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Call you that's your title. So hey, can you jump in for just a minute? This season we've really been talking through how do you reach people in different parts of our country? Because we travel a lot, we see a lot of different approaches in church.
Mm-hmm.
There's not really a model, I think, anymore that dials it in, but there are areas of the country that are very different.
Sure.
And so tell our listeners about the Front Range. I told you beforehand, I put in my notes the anti-church area, reaching people in the anti-church area. So talk about where Flatirons is located, especially I don't know if you call it broadcast campus, but Boulder County. And
Mhm.
I know you have locations elsewhere, but talk for our listeners, give us some context.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I'll talk both about Boulder County and then Denver because Boulder is actually a very unique place compared to Denver. Both fairly liberal and have some similarities, but I mean, Boulder County for years and years and years was um, anti church is the right description, anti Christian, anti faith, and our church is in Boulder County. Boulder's a huge county. Boulder's the center of it. But at the same time, like we're in a town called Lafayette, which is a small mining town. We call it the armpit of Boulder County. It's just like it used to be like nobody went there. Now there are some cool breweries that have popped up in restaurants, but Boulder County was antagonistic and is still antagonistic to the church. So during COVID, they would send over people to try to monitor, hey, are we following the regulations? Are people staying apart? Like city council members were coming to the church to like spy on the church to make sure like when they could find us doing something wrong so that they could give us a violation. And so we certainly have felt that in Boulder County, and it really has adjusted the way that we do ministry. Also, Boulder is maybe 25 minutes northwest of Denver. In the Denver area, that we call it the Front Range. What you find in Denver is there are a lot of transplants to Denver. So, like, there are people who call themselves natives. They're from Denver. They're from Colorado. They've lived there for generations or whatever. But for the most part, like, I don't know the statistic, but it's over 50% are transplants who have moved in from different places, the Bible Belt, California, wherever this is. And a church planter actually taught us this. When you ask someone who moves to Colorado why they moved to Colorado, um, they don't answer like people typically answer, which would be, I moved here for a job or I moved here for it to be closer to family. They point west toward the mountains and they say, I moved here for the mountains. And so you've got this group of people in Denver, high costs of living, fast paced. And at the same time, everyone moved out here because they love the mountains and they love being up on the mountains. And guess when they can go up to the mountains?
Sunday.
On Sundays and on
Yes.
Saturdays. And so like we'll have church planners and like the ones who plan out here, we actually helped a couple other churches develop what we would call a receiving network, where it's like church planners who would come from the Bible Belt or different networks would come in, and we actually do a training on what does it look like to do ministry in the Front Range when your people, they're like, I love this church. I'm committed to this church. And yeah, I'll see you in like 6, 7, 8 weeks because we've got the place up in the mountains or we're going hiking or whatever that is. And so like we, one of the, I think, convictions that we have is I think that church planners sometimes can miss this. Church planners love what they think their people will become when they're part of the church for a long time instead of loving who the people are as they are. And so there's this idea is like, well, once they come to my church, man, they're going to come every week and yeah, they're going to just do all the things they're volunteering. And it's like, no, our people, like even our most committed, even our staff, Doug, it's like our
Right.
staff is like, if they're got an off weekend, like oftentimes I'm up in the mountains.
Yeah, man, it's so true. And you know what? I can identify a little bit. I was the executive pastor for a long time here in Las Vegas. That's where I live now. And in the time I've lived here, I came in the 90s. Vegas was about 900,000 people. Today is almost 3 million.
Wow. Wow.
And it's the same thing. Everybody's a transplant. It's not the mountains, but nature plays a pretty big part here. People go up to the mountains, go out to the lake, whatever. And so I can identify some about getting
Sure.
the consistency and all that.
And I don't blame them just because during COVID we didn't do church on the weekends. And I was like, man, weekends are kind of nice. Like the mountains are like, I don't blame them, but it's reframing our mind to go like, how do we create a compelling experience and a narrative so that people, they value the mountains, but at the same time, they understand what they're a part of that they can't do in the mountains here at church.
Tell us a little bit of the high overview of Flatirons, the church, and really kind of the mindset you guys tend to have about ministering in a pretty difficult area. Those who are younger listeners probably don't remember, but there were like toe-to-toe battles that happened between the county of Boulder and churches,
Mhm.
like lawsuit and
Oh, yeah.
big
Oh, yeah.
time national media coverage stuff. And I think some of that's died down as much. So our younger listeners may not know that, but it is seriously an anti-church thing. So kind of give us this overview of Flatirons and how you guys have approached church in that context.
Yeah, we Flatirons has been around since '83, and it was really two small groups coming together who wanted to be able to invite their lost friends to church. And so the through line for Flatirons for the last 40 odd years has been, can we invite lost people to church? Will it make sense to them? It's a heart for the lost and broken. And so over the last 40 years, we've seen God do some pretty amazing things. And then when Jim, our lead pastor, got here 19 years ago, really saw Flatirons go from one campus to multiple campus, a few thousand people to I think like over 10,000 people right now. And so it's brought its own complexities, its own size issues, all that stuff. And we're a little bit more spread out. But the heartbeat of Flatirons has always been, we exist to bring the awesome life of Christ to people in a lost and broken world. That's what we're about. And so really the stories that we tell, when we gather our staff together and just celebrate a weekend, it's the stories of people who wouldn't fit in most churches. It's the stories of, people who bring their drug bags and like that's what they put in the offering because they're convicted about it. But like those are the stories that we perpetuate. Those are the stories that we really, really love. And man, I would just tell you, if I can share a quick story, we're baptizing this guy at the campus I was leading, and he was we baptized in hot tubs. This guy's wearing a Tom Brady jersey, so we made him take it off. We were like, we
Thank
can't
you.
baptize that. So
Amen.
and so he's got a like a tank top on. The dude has marijuana leaves on like both of his shoulders. So I mean, like you're like okay, like, and so we get him in, and his name's Calvin, and we're baptizing him. Me on one side, the other staff person on the other. I see on one set of knuckles, he's got the word weed tattooed across his knuckles. And I was like, man, this guy really loves weed. And so he had something on his other knuckles. I couldn't see it. I asked the other pastor, I was like, hey, what's on his knuckles over there? He was like, oh man, it's awesome. It said king. And I was like, so we've got the weed king who's getting baptized. And like to illustrate our church in the heartbeat is, if Calvin went to a lot of churches, not every church, but if he went to a lot of churches, all it takes is a half-second hesitation at the door from the greeter who shakes his hand. Half-second hesitation. And like the trigger goes from him going, okay, I'm not welcome with this person, to maybe I'm not welcome at this church, to maybe I'm not welcome to church at all. Maybe I'm not welcome with Jesus or with God, from a half-second hesitation. And I would say the thing that has set Flatirons apart that Jim didn't create, this was already a part of the church before Jim, but that he's continued to perpetuate is like when that guy shows up at the doors of our church, like he gets a better handshake than the person who shows up in the suit or the polo shirt or whatever, because we're just so glad that he's here and he's given church a shot again.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And just know that tons and tons of our listeners are either convicted about and want to create that type of environment or already are.
It's
Where
awesome.
that people far from God can find, hope and healing in Christ. And I do think you hit on it, and I want to go there a little further because it is becoming, some places it's not an issue yet, but Vegas it definitely is, and Colorado
Sure.
was the leader. And I was recently with a couple church leaders up in Longmont, and I thought he said some bizarre stat like there are actually X amount more weed stores than churches. Have you heard
Sure.
this stat?
I've not heard the stat. It doesn't surprise. I
It
mean,
was
we've got
staggering.
in the town of Lafayette, I think there are two churches just in our little immediate vicinity, and I know that there are three dispensaries that are there. I mean, it is a huge industry, and really, it's a weird thing to ask our volunteers, like, what do we do about abstaining? Like, we don't abstain from alcohol. We don't abstain from tobacco. What do you do when it comes to marijuana? And like back in the day, it was you would like marijuana, you smoke marijuana to get high. And oftentimes that's what it is. But like now, some of some of how it all works is there are people that can just they take a little fraction of a gummy. I can't believe we're going here. Like I'm like my staff's gonna be like,
It's all
Jesse,
right.
when can we have marijuana? I'm like, no, you can't.
Yes.
But it really is like it's made us confront some of the things we thought growing up about weed and about marijuana, and try to go like, how do we teach people how to be godly, follow Jesus, and also here's this thing that's somewhat similar to alcohol, and we're not abstainers out here of alcohol, so still in process.
Yeah, man, and I do think because I want to start asking questions around actual reaching people, but this
You don't want to keep on talking about weed,
I'm
man.
going to talk
Like
about it for a few more minutes because one of the guys that I've become friends with here in Vegas is like the lead weed lobbyist with the state. Like he got a lot, and he's like
awesome.
getting ready to open up like a 5-star restaurant with weed. I mean,
Oh gosh,
it
it's
blows my
crazy.
mind how way entrepreneurs think sometimes around this stuff. But here's for our listeners: a lot of you are in states like in the Midwest and other places where weed is still a medicinal thing, or however
Hmm.
that all
Hmm.
works, or not at all. But I do think the context for our listeners to begin to think about, Colorado led the way, first state that legalized. Nevada
Hmm.
wasn't very far behind, and it's a part of parenting now. I have to explain it to my kids. What does that smell? You know,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
so if you're a church leader and you're not faced with this yet, it is going to become an issue. And like Jesse said, because it was an illegal drug, it was stigmatized in a way. And I have no real opinions around it other than as church leaders, we're all going to have to tackle this issue if you haven't
Hmm.
had to already.
Hmm.
All right, back to kind of the core conversation. I always like to start around you personally. Stop thinking about you as executive leader, all that, and stop
Yeah.
thinking about the size of your church. Just think about you as a Christ follower. Where do your personal convictions around relational evangelism come from? You grew up a church home. You grew up as a pastor's kid. Like, where did that relational evangelism become part of your own? Like, I'm going to use this loaded word, discipling experience. Like, this is part of the deal that you signed up for when you followed Jesus. And then maybe tell us, we use this phrase, the one or a
Hmm.
ones in our lives, those who don't yet, from Luke 15, don't yet know Jesus. Tell us a story currently of a one in your life that maybe you've got some relationship with and what's going on there. So, two
Yeah,
things.
man.
Where did the conviction come from? And tell us about a real person.
Yeah, I would say that was a struggle for me because so much of our life centered around church when I was younger. Youth group, we had all these different activities, and like all my friends were youth group kids. I spent all my time at the gym at the church. We had a gym at our church. All this stuff, and so that was really a huge challenge for me until I graduated college. I went to a Christian college, and so again, surrounded by Christians all the time. And I went to work in between college and an internship. I worked at Waffle House for 6 months. I managed a Waffle House, and
Nice.
just we've already wasted too much time. I should have saved time for this, but
Scattered and smothered.
you could you could see the church that I was going to work at and the church that I was a part of from the window of the Waffle House. And man, Doug, when I would invite people to church with me, they would say, I know I need to go to church, but I got to get some things figured out first. I got to clean up first." And to realize that's their perception of the church, was that they had to clean up before they came in there. And so that gave me a personal passion for how do I both model in my life, but then also have conversations about faith, where I was just very inquisitive and like asking them questions. But I mean, when I worked at Waffle House, I was around a group of people that were wrestling with things that my friends never ever wrestled with. I learned so many different terminologies for drugs and different things like that from different staff people that work there. And that wasn't all of them. There were plenty of great staff, but then plenty of staff that like their world was Waffle House, and they worked there so that they could get more drugs for the next weekend. And that's kind of how they live their life. And it just gave me a passion for people who are very lost, very broken, in the conversations that we would have. And that carries on to this day. I don't work at Waffle House. We only have like one out here in Colorado, maybe one down south too. But I have a friend named Scott, and dear friend, owns some restaurants, and has both no interest in church, and that's one of the reasons I love him, and also like a healthy suspicion that just, and I pray for him, and I invite him and I ask him questions and we'll discuss. I try to find different routes into his world to have conversations about it. But he's always like, I know you're just trying to get me to go to your church. I know you're just trying. And one day I offered he was watching his two young boys. I was like, hey, you can bring them by church. They can play on the stuff and you and I can chat. He's like, that's how you get them, don't you? Like you get their kids and then their parents have to go. And I just like cracked up. So Scott is dear friend, try to get him around like different people on staff and my friends. And I genuinely believe that one day I think he's going to find Jesus. But at the same time, if he doesn't, man, still my friend, still love him. And we'll still hang out and talk leadership and life and all that.
That's awesome, man. And even hearing about the Waffle House and the conviction, I think that's what happens to a lot of church leaders. You're so busy doing the business of the church and running, I like to call it the machine, that sometimes you aren't doing the basic blocking and tackling that is, we say it this way. The Great Commission was always intended to be a personal mission statement for every Christ follower, not an organizational one. Like we spend so much time on organizational mission
that's good,
statements,
Doug.
and at the end of the day, we're missing out on, what Jesus intended. He gave it to the disciples. I want to say this though, because I'm going to jump into I want you to talk about some of the complexity, your multi-site, how many sites, whatever
Sure.
the number, 10,000 a weekend. But I do want to say to our smaller churches, what Jesse just shared is absolute key. If your church is declining or stagnated or whatever, wherever your church may be, it starts with you. You have
Yes.
to go
Yes.
first. You have to be convicted that the Great Commission was given to you as a personal mission statement. And then out of that, be able to teach and tell stories that inspire others to do the same. And so, even though we're going to talk about the complexities and maybe a bigger context, I want our smaller church listeners to understand this is not unique to a big church. You can be a very small church, and even we've learned it's even better when we get a church plant rolling like this early on and locked down, that it starts with me, and it's part of my job description as a Christ follower. So you talked about the complexity a little bit, and I would say, how do you best keep that culture of relational investment, relational evangelism, or invite, not just to church but into life? I hear you describing, hey, you're engaged in Steve, right?
Scott.
Scott's life. Like you actually know what's going on. How do you keep that, number one, let's say with your staff? Like, how do you keep them accountable to continue doing that? And then let's talk about maybe your board, if you guys have a board, and then your congregation. So first, tell us about staff. How do you keep staff aligned and convicted around relational evangelism?
Yeah. This morning Jim was actually challenging our staff. He's like, if you don't know a person who's going to hell right now, and if you don't have a burden for that person, I should fire you. Like, so we just use a lot of shame. That's how we do it. We could do it a lot better. And like, truth be told, a lot of our staff are younger. I've got 4 kids. We have a busy life, but it's like, are there people who I'm around, and am I trying to find avenues to get to know them? And like, genuinely, what I found is I can't do it with a ton of people. Like, there might be sports leagues. I found some ones through my kids' sports leagues. And then really just people that I feel like God puts in my plate, like in my way. And Scott's the person who said, hey, we should get a beer sometime. And I'm like, I'm even trying to think how that relationship started. But that was me just trying to pay attention to what God was trying to put in front of my place. So we really, we don't do any checklist or anything for our staff. It really is just like, guys, this has to be a priority for us, and this matters. And I would say Jim, our lead pastor, tells stories about the people who he's with, people that he meets at the gym, or the people he meets riding horses, where he's really investing in them and trying to introduce them to Jesus. And then from the board, I would say our board, we have just a ridiculously evangelistic board. Like they're and all of them are working jobs where they're encountering people from all different walks of life. But I mean, like one of our guys, he supervises, he is like 10,000 employees across the country. And I couldn't even explain it to you, but like he does a presentation where he talks about what's important to him. and his faith and his involvement in church. And he talks about, I'm on the board of my church and this is really important to me. And he goes, what I like is that starts a conversation with them because he can't push it on them from work or everything, but it starts a conversation where people can ask him questions. And then our church, one of our values has been come and see, and just you need to be inviting people to come and see what God's doing. And really we're starting to transition that into, it needs to be beyond come and see, it needs to be go and tell. Like obviously, if they come to Flatirons, they're not going to experience judgment. They're not going to experience people turning them away at the doors, but also we need to be able to tell our own stories. One of the things that um we're noodling on is doing a service maybe during the summer that's a testimony generator. So through AI, you can essentially spend about 5 to 10 minutes typing in some key points about your story, and then AI helps you generate your testimony. And like, we just wonder what would it look like to use a Sunday to allow our people to write their testimony so that then they could share it throughout the week. So I think that people at Flatirons just know, like, we're constantly talking about the lost people that we're engaged with, but then also like we're a place for lost and broken people.
Yeah, man, that is, my church here in Vegas. I don't know if you know the history of it, but the Gene Apple, who's, if you're older, you'll know the name. If you're younger, you won't. Was the lead pastor at Central in Vegas and had a
Hmm.
vision to put four churches in the four corners and hired an evangelist, Mike Bro, to be the church planner of the church I served. And he was like what you're talking about with Jim. Like he was always telling stories about the basketball leagues he was in. He was continually sowing seeds. And we had this slogan for a long time, come as you are. And like you, we've converted the last 5 or 6 years here in Vegas to being more about action. Like you're in the mission field every day of your life. There are ones
Yes.
absolutely
Yes.
everywhere. And a lot of what you just need to do is bring intention and awareness to your people. Like it's not even
Hmm.
training and knowing the Roman road. It's just like, can you like settle in and have a good conversation to get to know somebody? So I'm really appreciating that about you guys. Love the practicality of the testimonial piece because we believe in the modern church that is one of the keys, the ability to tell your personal story in a concise way that helps somebody see you're a real person and you're following this guy named Jesus. So love that, man. Do you know, are you committed yet or is that just still an
We're
idea?
we're we're not committed, so we've just been toying around. We've got to build the prompts to where we feel confident in it. But one of our creative pastor, he's the one who knows everything about AI. But he's like, I think that we could pull this off. And just I think again, our services are primarily inspirational, occasionally educational, but what does it look like for once a year to be a very, very practical, like not just a practical teaching, but like a practical step that you take that then you can go live out your faith differently. And so we'll see. I'll try to text you if we pull it off, but I would love to see it.
One of the things we'll often see in churches, you tell us that this happens to you guys, Flatirons, is that when you are evangelistically focused, you, a byproduct, especially if it's down and in the ranks of your church, a byproduct is church growth. Your church will grow. Like the gospel is a growth proposition. It's an
Mhm.
acquisition mission.
Yes.
And with that, oftentimes comes Christians from other churches, and all kinds of people show up. And then we're Americans, so everybody's got a little different opinion about what church should be. Then,
Sure. Sure.
and so one of the things we teach on with IC is this idea of, I believe, the greatest headwind church leaders face is misalignment.
Yes.
And misalignment is not only there sometimes when you're small, but when you're growing, misalignment is seeping in almost at every new person or family that's
Hmm.
showing up.
Hmm.
So I'm seeing a lot of head nodding. You're agreeing
Yes.
with this.
Yes.
Tell us how you fight for alignment. Like, how do you get alignment more and keep bringing back? Like, and maybe you can give us practical. We do these things on some rhythm to try to restore this innate DNA and alignment around relational evangelism, especially. But I'm going to guess it's in other things too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I could probably talk more to misalignment than relational evangelism, but just how we deal with misalignment, and you could apply that to anything. I think First of all, Jim does a great job. If somebody says, "Hey, man," and he'll say this from the stage once, twice a year, maybe, be like, "I'll talk to people in the lobby," and they'll come up to me and just say, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing this ministry? Because back in my old church, well, they used to do this, and it's just the most awesome thing." And Jim's response almost always is, "Hey, I love that you love that idea so much. Why'd you leave that church?" And really just like, "Hey, we're not going to do that, but your old church does it. And so if that's going to be the reason that you leave Flatirons, a church that does it, go from there." To the point where, Doug, you'll appreciate this weekend, I was talking to a lady who had a regrettable experience with one of our volunteers. And so we're trying to clean it all up, and she was frustrated. And I walk over to my daughter, who is 11 years old. She's seeing the conversation. She goes, "Dad, what happened?" I was like, "Well, this lady, she was just upset about some of the stuff that happened at the church." And Kate goes, "Well, if she doesn't like how things work here, she can just find another church."
Wow, that's awesome,
And I was like,
man.
"That's an 11-year-old." But I know that she's heard me or Jim say that from the stage, where it's just like, "Hey, if you don't like it here, you like, go in peace. God bless you. There are plenty of places." And so we try to be really clear about who we are, what we are. And then, man, I think like Kuzis and Posner in the leadership challenge, when they talk about like, how do you bring clarity and culture, and how do you cast vision, they say it's all about the stories you tell, the behaviors that you reward, and the incidents that you confront. And so for us, the stories we tell from the stage, the stories that we tell to our staff, they are all, like, 90% of them are focused on lost and broken people. They're lost and broken people finding Jesus, how the awesome life of Christ is transforming them. The behaviors that we reward, it really is like the notes that I write to staff, the notes that I write to people in the congregation. Like, I'm so glad that you're serving at Alpha, because Alpha is introducing people to Jesus in a really unique way. And then the incidents that we confront, that really is like, if we saw someone, which we just haven't seen this in a while, but if we saw someone who turned someone away because they smelled like alcohol, or turned somebody away because they're a woman's holding hands with her wife, we're like, "Hey, that does not happen here. Like, we're not doing that. We're going to be welcoming." And so we try to confront incidents where people are misaligned with really our core focus, which is reaching lost and broken people.
That's great. Let me tell you, listeners, that was incredibly rich. I know it was very fast, but I would say, number one of the things we encounter around misalignment, you hit on very first thing, Jesse, and that is there's fear. There's fear in the church
Yes.
leader
Yes.
to not be okay with losing people who are complainers, that are consumeristic in nature. If you really listen to what they're telling you, they're saying, "I'm a consumer of Christ and not a contributor." And so
Yes.
if you're a church leader in that, you just got to get over that fear and trust and lean into, these are scriptural mandates. Like the Great Commission is a
Mhm.
scriptural mandate. That would be number one. And then what were the three things again? You reward, tell
The
stories.
stories you tell, the behaviors you reward, and then the incidents that you confront.
Yeah, those are just awesome. And I think any of us could take those three rubrics or framework, those three questions, and do an audit around how are we creating the culture? Are we getting the results and creating the culture we want in our church? Not just our staff, but in our church.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that formula is great. And you referenced, it was a book, right?
It was the leadership challenge by Kuzis and Posner. I think it was
Great.
the vision chapter, but yeah, they kind of gave. That's my summary of the three categories for how they cast vision.
That's great, man. It's great. Hey, I do want to switch gears a little bit because I know you're passionate about it. Something we at IC are very passionate about. We've got, and that is church planning. And let me
Yes.
be really clear. This whole, it's a buzzword. Church leadership's a buzzword culture. I mean, every time you turn around, there's a new buzzword, and
Sure.
multiplication has been the word of the year for like a decade strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we've been trying to tout and really declare is the multiplication happens at the root level of the individual Christian.
Man, that's good. That's
And the
good, Doug.
byproduct is we get permission then to do organizational things like go plant other churches, or if you do that right. Now, we can be a great big organization and multiply ourselves organizationally, but if that core DNA of Great Commission isn't in there, you'll find, like in eras like COVID, what you've really built on. So I want for I want to set that context for the conversation around multiplication, because I think this
Yes.
conviction you have around relational evangelism and the way it's in the culture there, the way Jim rallies, inspires to it, super important. Tell us why then church planning is one of those byproducts for Flatirons for you. Like, why is that important? And then tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing currently around church planning.
So, first of all, I mean, you know all the statistics. I hope everybody knows the statistics. New churches and new campuses reach more lost people and more new people than existing churches. And I think that's the statistic holds. I forget if it was like a campus reaches more people in its first 5 or 7 years than typically it will throughout the rest of its time. Like new churches, new campuses reach new people, and we are about reaching new people. We have plenty of campuses. We will probably do a few more in the Front Range, but what happened during COVID? In maybe your listeners saw this. Doug, I'm sure you saw this. People, when church became online, we saw people find churches on social media. It's being shared, YouTube, whatever. And so what we saw at Flatirons, because we had an online presence for a while, is a lot of people across the country started tracking with Flatirons and then continued to. Maybe they were a part of a church in their town. Maybe they stopped going to any community. And we tried to plug them in with other believers. We said, hey, if there's a local church, go to a local church. One of the issues that we found is people who resonated with the heartbeat of Flatirons said, I wish that you guys would start a campus here because there's not a church in this town that I can invite my friends to. Like, I don't know where I invite my friend who drank 12 Coors Lights the night before and is going to show up in a tank top or a cutoff. Like, I need a church like that. And for us, we felt a burden for those people, while at the same time, a limitation of both organizational capability and desire. Organizational capability, we would be the world's worst managers of a campus in Phoenix or a campus in Vegas, or like I know churches that can do it, and like they're just better leaders than we are. But for us, it's just like, we cannot make that work. And two, we kind of don't want to do that. Like we like having everybody close. We like being able to meet up in person. And I mean, if there's a church in Hawaii that wants to talk, I mean, we might make exceptions, but at the same time, it's
I'm
like,
in. Sign me up.
at this point, we're just like, no, I don't think that's, I don't think we've been graced to do that. And so for us, we still felt a heart for those people that are trying to find a place to bring their really lost friends. It didn't feel like there was a place they could bring them. And so we set out to start a church planting network out of Flatirons, and it's partnering with different networks. We've got some out in Phoenix, some in up in the Northeast, the Northwest. Currently, there are 7 churches that we've helped plant, and through other means. But the dream and the vision is that if we have a group of people who resonates with Flatirons, and then we know a planter that has our same heart for lost and broken people, different methodology, different whatever, but it's like they carry that culture. What would it look like for us to target through social media and through our announcements, whatever, that group of people who say, they live in Jersey, and say, hey, there's this church called Eden Church, and they're launching, and they share the same heartbeat as Flatirons, and you guys would be able to reach your lost friends, lost neighbors, lost family. They could come to a local church. And in Phoenix with the Garden Church, the first one that we helped partner with, I think we saw a couple dozen Flatirons people who plugged into the local church, the Garden Church. And that's so good for us, because them watching online, if you just watch online continuously, you are becoming a consumer. It's teaching you to become a consumer,
Exactly.
even if you fight against it. And so for us, that's where church planting comes into play, because we want there to be local expressions of the church that are trying to reach lost and broken people. And then selfishly, Doug, I'll just tell you, like, church planters try stuff that we're not going to try. And they're
Right.
like, they're innovating on a way that Flatirons, and I know you're familiar with Jim. Like Jim, our lead pastor, he'll try anything. We had a horse on the stage, to have this guy break a horse on our stage back in the fall. So we'll try anything. But systemically, an older church with a lot of campuses and a lot of staff is not going to be able to innovate at the speed of a church plant. And so for us, we're learning from these guys. They're in with us right now, and they're like learning from us, but we're also like, hey, Tell me some of the stuff you're trying that you couldn't do at your old church because it was too big or had too much going on. And like that's the stuff we're paying attention to. So it's a win-win for both sides.
I'm so grateful for your viewpoint, Jesse. I mean, it's needed that we need to be planning churches at a rate much quicker than we currently are. And so I'm just
Yes.
thankful that you
Yes.
guys are invested in financially and with leadership and vision and everything else. I don't even know if you know this, man. We, because of our relationships to church planning, I've been a part of 3 church plants over my lifetime. We started installing the Church OS toolkit in church plants. Like we do an orientation for church planters. We've got over 200 church plants.
Dude.
And you know what the shocking thing is, Jesse? A couple years ago, I actually did one of these planter orientations in Denver at North Hills, maybe something like that. A church
Northern
plant-
Hills, sure.
Northern
Sure.
Hills, yes. But the church planters, there were a group from Houston, a group from somewhere else, and literally in this couple 2.5 days we spent together, the leaders coming to conviction that a year in, 10 months into the plant, the running of the machine was already breaking the evangelistic
Yes.
temperature.
Yes.
And and under conviction, like we've turned inward. How did this happen? This is not
Yes.
why I started this church. And so I just think this investment you're making, and our continued, like, wherever we're working together to raise this in planters, like, not only we need to get you planted, we need to make sure you stay grounded, because if you plant well,
Yes.
you're going to
Yes.
grow, and
Mhm.
then that misalignment's going to creep in, and consumers are going to show up, and one day you're going to wake up and go, "What in the heck happened?"
Without a doubt. Well said, Doug. Well
Yeah,
said.
man. Hey, Jesse, our time's almost up, but I always
Yeah.
like to ask this. All kinds of leaders listening to this podcast, a lot are executive level. And so if you had like a one word of advice, or one like thing that's really God's been laying on your heart right now that you'd like to say to a bunch of church leaders who are leading congregations all over this country, what is something you'd want to say to those church leaders or highlight for them, or is there anything in you that you'd like for them to hear?
Yeah, I'm gonna do 3 things, Doug. So I'll try to do it really quick. Number 1, um, your staff have questions about decisions you're making at your church, and those questions, if they're not addressed about the how, they'll start dropping down into what you're doing, like the philosophy of ministry. If those questions don't get answered, it's going to drop down into the who, where they're going to question you as a leader. And then if those questions don't get answered, they start to doubt and question the whole thing. And so I've been doing some like podcasts and talking about this concept of organizational doubt and how do we address it and how do we help people confront the doubt that's in them. You've got to do that with your staff members, because if you can figure out what level they're in, it also takes some of the bite out of the questions, where it's like oftentimes as a leader, I feel like if somebody's questioning the how we do things, they're questioning me as a person, and I'm like, oh, you're an ethical doubt, you're questioning me, and it's like, no, they're not questioning me, they're just questioning how, and they just need a little bit of a conversation, and then they can get back to suspended doubt, and they're just rolling. So that's one thing. Organizational doubt is worth looking into with your team. Number 2, this is for larger churches. You are ignoring your mid-level leaders. You are underinvesting in your mid-level leaders. They're in one of the most difficult jobs, especially culturally today. Jenny Catron has done some writing about how I think it's staff members no longer look at the C-suite or the exec team as the people who have the most information and can be the most trusted. They look at their manager. So your mid-level managers are now holding this weight of responsibility. Most of them have been elevated from being a peer to the people they're leading to now leading those people, which is one of the hardest leadership transitions to make. And they're not getting the coaching that exec team members are getting. They're not getting the networking. So I would say invest in your mid-level leaders. Third thing that I would say is you have got to be vigilant about your staff culture, because it's going to start with your staff culture when it comes to, and I know this is some of the work that you guys do at IC, but it's like your staff values and your staff culture. We went through a season where we didn't steward it well. And we got really unhealthy as a church, and the people in the pews couldn't really tell. But man, the people on staff, I've got dozens of friends who have bad memories and a bad taste in their mouth from Flatirons because of how unhealthy we got because we didn't steward our culture. And so I would just tell people, like, you've got to steward your culture more than you think that you need to. And I think you guys are a great resource for knowing how to do that.
Wow, man. Again, strong. That was just really strong, those three things. And thank you for that last piece. I'd agree. I feel the same thing. Even leading IC, I'm feeling that right now. Like, we've got to
Mm.
really be after our culture continuously. And yeah, just really good. Jesse, thank you for being on. And just really appreciate you doing this, man. Just been great.
Doug, grateful to have a conversation. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Hey, so thanks for listening to the Intentional Churches podcast. And if this thing's been helpful to you at all, we'd ask that you'd leave a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcast. It helps us and the audience as we grow, understand what this podcast is all about. And remember, like I said at the top, we've got this brand new Intentional Churches community that you can be a part of for free. You just go to create an account with your email address, and you can begin collaborating with other church leaders who are going to be missionally minded, like you heard us talk about today. Just go to intentionalchurches.com/community. We'll see you next time. Thank you all for listening.